He promised to come back just for me, but married my sister. My name is Ruby Florentine Maxwell. I'm 91 years old, and I live alone in an old little house in Lubbock, Texas. The walls here are made of chipped brick. They smell like memories, and they hold more secrets than most folks would ever guess. I've got old portraits hanging up, a ceiling fan that spins slow like it's tired of life, too, and a red ribbon tied to the mirror, worn but steady, just like me. These days I don't get many visitors. Just the portraits and the memories keep me company. Maybe that's why I'm telling this story now, because it's time. Time to finally speak about what I've carried my whole life. A real story from this grandmother. A love story left untold from the war. I was a nurse during World War II. I wasn't a hero, just another black woman with a heavy heart and calloused hands, trying to heal what the world kept breaking. I volunteered. Signed up because I felt it was my duty, but also because I needed to run. I didn't know exactly from what. I just knew I had to go. And I ended up in a field hospital somewhere deep in Europe, surrounded by the sound of bombs, the scent of blood, and glances that said more than 1,000 letters ever could. That's where I met him. A soldier like any other. No real name, no full file, but with a presence that crept into my body like a slow fever. He used to call me Miss Ruby, with a tenderness no one else ever gave me. Somewhere between bandages and silence, a love was born. One that wasn't allowed. A love that was never spoken, but shaped my entire life. A love lost in the war, but that found me when I least expected it. I'm not telling this story out of pride or regret. I'm telling it because I'm too old to keep hiding what still beats inside me. And maybe, just maybe, one of you out there has also kept a love tucked away in silence for decades. If that's you, leave a comment. I'll read every single word. And if you can, subscribe to this channel. This space is for those of us who've lived a lot and still feel too much. Some folks believe a promise only counts if it's made out loud, with clear skies overhead, hands held tight, and witnesses around. But I remember mine, and it happened in the shadows, with the strong smell of gasoline in the air and the sound of choking engines rumbling somewhere in the distance. He didn't hold my hand. He didn't have to. All it took was that look, that trembling way he stared at me like he knew he was leaving, and might not ever come back. That's when he whispered it, almost like a prayer, that he'd return to me. Not to the country, not for the medals, but to me. Just to me. It didn't sound like a vow. More like a goodbye dressed up as hope. And still, I believed it. Because when you're deep in war, even a crumb of love feels like a feast. He spoke so softly, like he was afraid destiny itself might overhear. As if he were saying, "Don't tell anyone, Ruby. This is just for us." And I listened. I kept that promise like a secret letter tucked into a bra, close to the heart but hidden from the world's eyes. I don't know if it was youth or desperation that made everything feel so real, so intense. Maybe it was just the hunger to be remembered by someone when the smoke cleared. I wasn't the prettiest nurse in that camp, not by a long shot, nor the sweetest. But he looked at me like I was the last bit of solid ground before the ocean swallowed everything whole. And that look, that's where the promise took root. No ring, no witness, no ribbon tying us together. Just me and him. And the war's noise trying to drown out every whisper of tenderness. Even now when I close my eyes, I can still feel his breath warming the side of my face. The strained voice. The sweaty skin, the stained uniform, all tangled into a memory time never managed to wash away. And to think, no one else heard it. That promise lived entirely inside of me, like some relic that never left its box. A silent vow to the world, but a scream inside my chest, a whisper that never stopped echoing. And maybe that's why I never told anyone. Because when something is said just for you, it feels like sharing it out loud might strip it of its power. But now, all these years later, I can't help but wonder, did he really mean it? Or did he just need someone, anyone, to believe him, even if just for a moment? In the field hospital, names got lost in the shuffle of stretchers, torn tags and charts smeared with blood and sweat. Sometimes I asked for names just to be polite, already knowing I'd forget them minutes later. But what I never forgot, what no one ever really forgot, was the way certain people looked at you. And his eyes. Oh, his eyes held both fear and hope, like a soldier, unsure if he was still alive or just dreaming. He always called me Miss Ruby, with that crooked smile, part teasing, part charmed, like he knew the formality was just an excuse to say my name again and again. And I pretended to find it funny, to brush it off. But every time he said it, my body reacted with that slow heat, the kind that starts in your belly, climbs your ribs, and makes you want to laugh for no reason at all. No one else called me that. Just him. Just the soldier with deep brown eyes and long lashes, who never told me where he was from, but used to hum old songs from Alabama. He didn't have a full medical file. Just a half-written last name, and an ID number that kept changing every time they moved him to another tent. But there was something steady about him that threw me off. It was always the same smile when I walked in, always the same quiet understanding when the others were asleep. It felt like, even without a real name, he knew exactly who I was. And that scared me, because I felt the same. I knew him, not by facts, but by feeling. Like love didn't need a history, just presence. Sometimes in between dressing wounds and easing morphine into trembling veins, I'd linger a second longer than I should near his cot. I was afraid someone might notice, so I'd cover it up, adjusting his blanket, pretending to reach for something on the shelf. But what I really wanted was to listen to his heart, not with a stethoscope, but with my own quiet. I wanted to know if that uneven rhythm was from the injury, or if it was an answer to mine. That's when I realized the most dangerous kind of love is the one that blooms where everything is supposed to stay impersonal, where touch is technical, care is duty, and time is far too short for feelings to take root. And yet, it did. Even without a name, even without permission. And maybe that's why it became unforgettable. I remember that night clearly because the wind had changed. It was like even the air had grown heavier, more complicit in whatever was about to unfold. The infirmary was unusually calm, a rare miracle, and the moonlight slipped through the slits in the canvas like it was spying on us. He was lying there, eyes half open, body worn out, but awake. I knew he was waiting for me, even without saying a word. And I came, slowly, like someone approaching a secret that doesn't want to be uncovered. That night, love couldn't be spoken. It didn't fit. It was too big to squeeze into words and too fragile to become a scandal. What I did was simple. I let my red scarf fall beside his cot. That was it. A silly little gesture, almost childish, but full of everything we weren't allowed to say. It was my signal, a quiet reminder that I was there, that he was seen, not just by a nurse's hands, but through a woman's eyes. That scarf was my favorite. I wore it on days when I needed to remind myself I was still young, still a woman, still desirable, maybe. It smelled like cheap soap and the skin of my own neck. When he saw it on the ground, he didn't touch it right away. He just stared at it, like it said more than I'd ever be brave enough to speak. And it did. It said, "I remember you." It said, "I want you to remember me too." We stayed like that for minutes that stretched out like hours, surrounded by nothing but the soft creaks of the tense bones and the breath of wounded men. I couldn't touch him any more than duty allowed. Couldn't say what throbbed in my chest. But that little scrap of cloth became our silent code, our way of meeting each other in the middle of chaos. Because love, in that place, meant exactly that. Not interrupting the world. Just carving out a shelter inside it. I never wore that scarf again. I folded it gently and tucked it into an envelope I hid deep in the lining of my suitcase. Today it's faded, smells like mildew and memory. But it still brings me back to that night when a forbidden love had to settle for the language of objects. Because sometimes when war shuts our mouths, silence becomes the loudest thing we have. Sometimes in the tense hours just before dawn, when the sky felt like it might come crashing down and the flashes lit up the infirmary canvas like upside-down lightning, he would hum. Softly, just for himself? Or maybe just for me, if I was close enough to catch it. It was an old hymn, the kind kids learn in wooden churches with stiff pews and dirt floors. I recognized it, knew every syllable of that song. My grandmother used to sing it while washing clothes out back. But there, in the rough voice of a wounded soldier, the music carried a different weight. It felt like, in the middle of the war, he was digging around inside himself for a piece of childhood. A place where there was still a mother, the smell of strong coffee, and a skinny dog barking in a dusty yard. And I, listening, was carried along with him. That song made me forget the sirens, the muffled groans of the men, even the aching in my own worn-out feet. It was like hearing an old photograph, not seeing, hearing, as if the past had a sound, and it had chosen him to be its voice. We never spoke of it. It was a secret we silently agreed on. He only hummed when he thought he was alone, and I pretended not to notice. Kept busy with my duties, stacking bandages, washing my hands. But inside, my whole body was turning toward him, like tuning into a forbidden radio station. It was in those moments that I felt closest to him. Not in the stolen glances, not in the restrained gestures, but in that soft, tired sound, like the flutter of a bird's wings inside a box. I used to wonder what he was like before the war. Maybe in Alabama, with scraped knees and a shirt flapping open at the chest, chasing fireflies at dusk. Did he ever fear the dark like I did? Did he keep secrets under his pillow, or scribble names in the back of a school notebook? That old hymn told a story he never had to explain, and somehow, without meaning to, I became a part of it. Even now, when I hear someone humming softly, my heart turns backward. Not because I expect to find him there, but because I understand. I understand that even in the most absurd, brutal moments, the soul will still search for a corner to remember where it came from. And in that war, my corner was him, and the faint hymn he sang between bombings. It was so close, unbelievably close. Sometimes I think, if the ground hadn't shaken at that exact moment, if fate hadn't barged in so urgently, everything might have turned out different. We were near each other, like so many times before. But there was something in the air, a silence thick with intention, a kind of weariness that made room for bravery. He touched my shoulder gently, like someone asking permission before getting lost. And I turned, slowly, ready to listen, or maybe to finally speak. It wasn't a kiss. It didn't quite get there. But somehow it was worse. It was an almost kiss, the kind that leaves your whole body trembling, more than if it had actually happened. Our faces were just inches apart, and I could feel his breath, warm, laced with the scent of ointment and dried blood. My heart pounded not from fear, but from a sweet, aching anticipation. The kind of feeling so rare in war, it almost felt sinful. And right then, the noise. A soldier collapsed at the tent entrance. Shouts, chaos, disruption. Instinct took over. Of course I ran. No hesitation. No glance back. That's what we were trained to do. Save what could still be saved. Catch life with bare hands. When I returned, minutes later, adrenaline still racing, he was lying there. Eyes closed. Asleep, maybe. Pretending, probably. And that space between us, that tiny space that had vanished for a heartbeat, stretched open again. It turned back into the gap between what we felt and what we dared to say. I spent the next few days trying to recreate that moment, to find another pause in the chaos where we could stand face to face, without uniforms, without blood, without all the noise. But war has a cruel habit of stealing every tender opening. Everything got busier, dirtier, colder, and that almost kiss faded into memory. One of those memories that hides behind your eyes when your head hits the pillow. I think the worst part wasn't not saying it. The worst part was knowing he wanted to say it too. And we both kept waiting for the other to begin. Sometimes the truest kind of love is the one that gets stuck in your throat. The one the world didn't let become words. And maybe because of that, it kept echoing through a whole lifetime. The letter came folded in 4, dusty, with smudges from someone's fingers. It was handed to me by a nurse who barely knew who it was for. Someone had rushed it to him, saying, "It's for Miss Ruby. I think it's hers." My heart knew it before my eyes did. I opened it with sweaty hands, already feeling, just from the touch, that it wasn't just paper. It was another piece of him that had come loose and landed in my lap, like a leaf carried by the wind that still holds the scent of its tree. It was simple. So simple it hurt. He started with my name but got 2 letters wrong. Ruby became Rudy, like his heart was writing faster than his head could keep up. And I read it with tears in my eyes, caught between laughing and aching. There were no vows, no poetry, just short, shaky lines, like someone scribbling in a rush before the train pulls away. But between every line, I read everything he never found the courage to say out loud. "Thank you for looking at me that way," one part said, as if the gaze of a woman was more healing than any dose of morphine. At the end he'd drawn something, a crooked little sketch, almost childish. It looked like a ribbon. Red, maybe? Or was it the scarf, the one I let fall by his cot? That broke me. Not because it was pretty, but because it was ours. Because even without kisses, even without words, we had our codes. Little things no one else would ever understand. And in that letter he proved he remembered, that he felt it, that somewhere, in a pocket or tucked close to his chest, he still carried a piece of me. I didn't show anyone, not even the other nurses, who loved swapping notes with the soldiers. That letter was just mine, a warm, fragile secret, made of thin paper and rough emotion. I hid it in the dirty laundry sack, because no one ever touched that. Between torn socks and stained cloths, it stayed, like a flower hidden in an ugly place, so it wouldn't be picked too soon. Sometimes I think hiding that letter was my way of keeping him with me. Like keeping it away from the world's eyes might stretch out that feeling, the one that said he was still near. And even now, whenever I sort through old clothes or hear someone mispronounce my name, I remember that poorly written letter, and everything it said, in the spaces between the lines, and in the silence. At first, I still waited for a sign, a letter, a message passed along by someone, a whisper between cots saying he was okay. But after a few weeks, the silence started to grow limbs, and before I realized it, his absence wasn't just a missing piece anymore. It was routine, a kind of backward presence that took up space without making a sound. It started with little things: the empty seat by the fire pit, the corner of the tent where he used to lean his elbow. Everything began to feel quieter than it should. The infirmary gate let out a high-pitched squeal whenever someone came through, and every time it creaked, my heart jumped. I pretended not to notice, but my eyes would shoot straight to the entrance, hoping to catch sight of that rumpled uniform and that crooked smile. It was never him, and still, I looked, like someone who knows it isn't, but looks anyway. Because hope has that kind of stubbornness you can't train out of yourself. Even the wind began to sound like him. When it passed through the field and whistled through the seams in the canvas, it echoed his voice. Low, dragging, a little hoarse. I had to teach myself not to answer the empty space, to keep moving, even when my body wanted to stop. Because war doesn't make room for anyone who stays stuck in yesterday. But I, Ruby, stayed. At least on the inside. And no one ever noticed. I kept tending, kept smiling, kept stitching bodies back together. But deep down, mine was bleeding too. The other nurses talked about fleeting romances. Some gave in to them, others avoided them. But with me, it was different. I never spoke of him, never said his name. Not that I ever fully knew it. But my silence said his name all the time. Every habit I repeated without thinking. Every night I stayed awake longer than I needed to. It was all for him. For his absence, which felt more present than any letter read out loud ever could. We learn to live with what's missing. And maybe that's the cruelest lesson of adulthood, realizing that some loves don't end. They just settle quietly into corners of the soul. His absence became my silent alarm, a constant reminder that, even without speaking it, I had loved. Even without touching, I had belonged. And even without an answer, I still waited. 2 years. That's how long it took between the silence and his return. I had grown used to his absence, or at least, pretended I had. When I saw him again, it felt like being startled inside an old dream. We were at a local ceremony, one of those welcome home events for veterans. I hadn't even wanted to go, but duty dragged me there. And maybe a tiny sliver of hope that still lived quietly inside me. And then, there he was. Clean uniform, perfect posture, his hair shorter, skin firmer, his stride more certain. But his eyes were searching for something else. I watched him cross the room with his shoulders back, and that smile ready to go. My heart skipped just like it had the first time, then dropped like a stone. Because he didn't see me. He didn't look for me. His gaze swept the room quickly, until it landed on her, Violet. My sister. Younger, lighter, easier to love. They moved toward each other like they already knew one another. But I knew they didn't. That spark was new, and far too quick. I stood still, trying to understand what my body was feeling. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper, quieter. A kind of frustration that doesn't know where to go. Like I'd been forgotten by a story that was partly mine, too. The woman he said he'd come back to was me. But the one he saw, the one he chose, was someone else. And the cruelest part? She had no idea. There was no room for confrontation, no justifiable words. He owed me nothing, and I never asked. The promise had been made in the dark, with no signature, no witnesses. And maybe that's what made it hurt more, because I was the only one who knew it was real. I watched them smile at each other, exchange words I couldn't hear. and I realized that time had moved through me, but not through them. They were beginning. I was being left behind. I went home that day carrying a new kind of silence. Not the silence of absence, the silence of replacement. Like something had been ripped away and instantly filled with something else. And the strangest part of it all is, I still felt love. Not for the man he had become, but for the man he had been. The one who whispered promises in the dark. The one who only existed between bombings and red scarves. I bought that dress in a tucked-away shop in El Paso, the kind where the sales ladies spoke in hushed tones and wrapped fabric in tissue paper like it was treasure. It was navy blue, with tiny gold buttons, and a seam that hugged the waist in a way that was elegant but modest. I took my time choosing, touched every piece like I was trying to read the future through the fabric. And when my fingers landed on that dress, I knew it was for him. Or rather, for the day he would come back to me. I stored the dress with almost religious care, folded it slowly, lined it with white cloth, placed it at the bottom of the chest beneath my bed. I told no one. It was a secret just for me. A piece of hope, hand-stitched and sacred. Every time I imagined our reunion, it was in that dress. I pictured him seeing me with eyes full of memory, recognizing the navy blue like a sign. Like the fabric itself whispered. I waited. But time kept moving, and the dress stayed there untouched while I changed. My body no longer fitted the same way. My hands, once soft, now carried the lines of someone who'd lived through too many sleepless nights. And still I never had the heart to let it go. As if, in some strange way, I still hoped he'd knock on the door, or that time might return to me the version of myself who once fit that shape. On cleaning days, I'd open the chest and look at it. Sometimes I'd bring it to my nose, just to remember. It smelled like old talcum powder, like fabric kept too long, like dreams gone stale. I never dared put it on, not even out of curiosity. It felt like putting it on would break the silent pact I had made with the past, because that dress wasn't just clothing. It was an altar, a folded memory, a love story left untold from the war, hidden between the pleats of what might have been. It's still there, even now at 91. I know it sounds foolish, but some things we don't throw away, not out of attachment, but out of reverence. Because they are witnesses of who we were when we still believed that promises could stitch destinies together. And that dress, it's the only proof that once I got ready to be chosen. The church was small and white, the kind that feels built to hold family secrets. I was invited, of course. Violet was my sister. And even with everything lodged in my chest like a stone, I knew not going would be worse. It would raise questions, stir whispers, ignite the kind of gossip that spreads too fast in a small town. I wore my best dress, pinned up my hair with care, and put on lipstick like someone putting on armor. But when I got close to the church, my feet wouldn't obey. I stayed back, outside, sitting on a dusty tree stump. The sun was harsh, and the hot ground seemed to throb beneath my shoes. I could hear everything. The murmurs before the wedding march, the pastor's trembling voice, the muffled laughter of teary relatives. And then, the I do. Short, steady, piercing. It bounced off those wooden walls and settled into my bones. It was official. He belonged to another woman now. And the cruelest part? That woman had my blood. I cried without sound. Just my eyes. There was no space for a scene, no room for explanations. No one knew about the letter, the scarf, the late-night hymns, the almost kiss. That love was mine, but invisible, never spoken. And love that stays quiet, can't interrupt what's said out loud. So I let them marry, let the world clap, And I stayed silent, because in that silent war, I had already lost long before I ever had a chance to fight. When they came out of the church, rice in their hair and hope in their eyes, I hid behind a parked truck. I saw him fix the strap of her dress, the same way he once adjusted his blanket when I tucked him in. I saw him smile that tired smile I knew like my own reflection, and for one fleeting second, I thought our eyes would meet. But they didn't. He didn't see me, or pretended not to, which, in the end, is the same thing. I went home with a bitter mouth and a hollow chest. That wasn't just the end of a forbidden love. It was the burial of an entire love story, one with no flowers, no sermon, no mourners, but me. And still, even after that day, I kept it all. Like someone keeping the ashes of a fire no one else ever saw burn. After the wedding, life went on, or at least pretended to. They moved into a small house on the other side of town, and I visited when I had to, when I was expected to, when missing my sister outweighed the pain of seeing him there, sitting in the chair that, in a fairer world, might have been mine. He never looked at me the same way again. He was polite, almost too kind. But the look that once promised he'd return, that was gone. Or hiding, which sometimes is even crueler. Violet, poor thing, never knew, never suspected. But now and then she'd say things that gutted me from the inside out. She'd mention how he talked in his sleep, that he called out to a miss in the middle of the night, that he'd hum an old church hymn from Alabama she'd never heard before. And when she asked him why, he'd say it was just the war. Just the war. But I knew. It was about me, about us. The echo of something trapped in time, haunting the walls of their marriage like a silent ghost. There was one time she told me, laughing, that he had a dream about a nurse. Said he woke up crying, murmured my name without realizing. She thought it was funny. Said maybe he was mixing up faces. Can you imagine you taking care of him back then, Ruby? She joked. I smiled. But inside it felt like someone had run a hot finger across an old scar. That love story from the war, the one we never told, was still alive, thrashing inside me while on the outside I just offered her more tea. We never spoke of it, neither of us. It was our invisible pact, the inheritance of silence. He stayed married to my sister for over 40 years. They had children, built a home. And me? I went on with my life as a nurse, single, dedicated, always with a smile at the ready. But I carried a weight no one ever saw. And maybe the strangest part of it all was this. Even without words, we both knew. And that shared awareness, that's what hurt the most. Sometimes I wonder, if he had said something, would everything have changed? But maybe not. Maybe our love was only ever meant to exist inside the war. A trench-bound kind of love, born from chaos, doomed to silence. And still, just as real as any ring. It arrived on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where you sweep the porch without thinking. The mailman didn't even get off his bike, just stretched out a weathered envelope, yellowed with age, my name lightly scrawled in the corner in a familiar hand. There was no recent stamp, no legible postmark. It looked like something that had slipped through a crack in time and been found by mistake. But the second I touched the paper, my whole body remembered. The scent, the feel. That paper had crossed invisible oceans to land in my hands, all those years later. I opened it slowly. Inside was just a single sheet, folded carefully, and already starting to fray at the edges. One sentence, written in the same uncertain handwriting, I never forgot. Sorry I came back to the wrong place. That was it. No date, no name. But there was a faint trace of a smell. Cinnamon and sweat. An odd combination, but one that belonged only to him. It was the same scent that clung to his field uniform, the one I breathed in when changing his bandages, or when my red scarf fell beside his cot. I read it over and over again. That one sentence, sharp and clean, cut right into the spot where pain had long turned to scar. There was no room left for anger, no room for reply. Just recognition. A late wave from someone who, deep down, had always known. Yes, he had come back, but not to me. He came back to what the world expected of him, not what his heart wanted. And now, old, maybe near the end, he wanted me to know that he hadn't forgotten, that somehow he still cared about what we left behind. I tucked the note inside the envelope that held his old letter. Now the two sleep together, side by side, just as they never could in life. One saying everything without knowing how, the other asking for forgiveness, far too late. And there, among crumpled pages and undone promises, lives the truest story I've ever known. A story of love lost to war and buried in silence for almost half a century. I never told anyone. Just read it aloud once, on a night of gentle rain, as if I were speaking directly to him, as if somehow he might still be listening. And in that moment, for the very first time, the pain didn't bite like it used to. It just rested. It was only when she grew up that I noticed. My niece, their daughter, had his hands. Not just in shape, long fingers, slender joints, a soft callus at the base of her thumb, but in how they moved. She tucked her hair behind her ear exactly the way he used to, held a glass with that same absent-minded care, as if the world might slip right through her fingers. And when she wrote, she tilted the paper to the left, just like him. Seeing it was like being pulled back into a memory I never asked for, but couldn't let go of either. At first, it unsettled me. It hurt even, because every movement of hers was an echo, a reminder of everything left unsaid, of all that he and I left in the shadows, out of fear, out of timing, out of silence. But over the years I began to see it differently, as if God, or fate, or whatever governs these things, had left me a living reminder, a bitter-sweet gift, both tender and cruel. There was one afternoon we were washing dishes together, and as she wrung out the dish towel, the motion was so unmistakably his that I had to step away for a moment. I pretended to drop something, took a breath, pulled myself back together. But inside I was yanked straight back to that canvas tent, to the scent of iodine and blood, to the sound of that voice calling me Miss Ruby. Just for a second it was like he was there, disguised as a daughter, wearing the face of the past. I never told her, never said that sometimes when she handed me a glass of water or ran her fingers through her hair. I saw the man who once promised he'd return to me. How could I? She was happy. She deserved to remember her father as a hero, without the burden of shadows. But I knew, and maybe he knew too, that a part of him visited me daily through those hands. Now, when she hugs me, I feel a strange kind of comfort. It's not quite healing, not quite closure. It's just presence, a love transformed. He didn't come back to me the way he said he would, but he left traces, tiny marks in everyday gestures. And sometimes those crumbs of memory are what feed the part of us that still believes, even if we no longer remember where we buried that hope. It was in a modest nursing home, on a pale-skied afternoon, that fate handed him back to me one last time, but worn down, hollowed out, stripped of the words that once tied us together. They told me he had Alzheimer's, that he often mistook faces and called out names of long-dead brothers. Still I went. Not for him. For me. I brought flowers I knew he wouldn't recognize, and wore an old scarf around my neck. Not just any scarf. That one. The red ribbon that had slept for years inside my suitcase, tucked beside the letter and the cloth. The ribbon that had fallen beside his cot on that night when love had to stay silent. When I stepped into the room, he sat in a wheelchair, eyes drifting somewhere beyond the window's edge. He didn't know me, didn't speak, but at one point he looked at me, or rather, at my neck. His gaze moved slowly downward to the ribbon, and there it stayed, held. Not for seconds, but for something deeper, something timeless. Then he made a gesture that tore straight through the years. He brought his hand to his chest, closed his fingers gently, as if gripping something that wasn't there anymore, but that his body still remembered. He didn't say my name, didn't utter a word, but in that single motion, I knew. He remembered. Not with his mind, that no longer followed the map of time, but with his body, with his bones, with the part of the soul that illness can't touch. It was as if everything we lived had been etched somewhere deeper than memory. The faded red ribbon, quiet and soft, became the key. The last word we never said, now stitched into his gaze. We sat there for a while, unhurried, like two old lives looking into a broken mirror. The nurse told me he rarely reacted to anyone like that it was unusual for him to show anything at all. I just smiled, without explaining, because nothing could explain what had happened in that room, in that gesture, in that final moment that, even without words, sealed a forbidden love story that had never truly left. I went home with the ribbon still tied around my neck, and that night, for the first time in many, many years, I didn't dream of him. I think my heart understood that the goodbye had finally arrived, and that even though it had never been said, he recognized me in the purest, quietest, most honest way. 70 years. That's how long it took me to give this story a voice. Not because it didn't hurt enough, but because it hurt too much. I kept it all inside, like pressing a dried flower between the pages of a book. Not to forget, but to preserve. I never told Violet, never told a soul. Not out of fear of judgment, but out of respect for what was ours. For what only lived because it stayed hidden, tucked between folded linens, yellowed paper, and long-held silence. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had spoken. If, on the night of the almost kiss, I had taken his face in both hands and said, "Stay, stay for me." But back then, women like me were taught to be useful, quiet, strong in silence. I was a World War II nurse. My love had no place. It was a love untold from the war. No photograph, no frame, no open letter. But it existed, and it still beats inside every object I kept. The ribbon, the scarf, the letter with the misspelled name. Today my house is made of portraits and absence. The ceiling fan spins like it's tired of the same old thoughts. Visitors are rare, conversations even rarer. But in those long pauses, on days when the sun slips through the cracks and draws shadows on these chipped brick walls, the story returns. His voice hums softly in my head, and the past calls me Miss Ruby in that same tone of a lost boy trying to sound brave. I don't want pity. I had a good life. I was useful. I cared for many. I was loved by others. But this love, the silent one, it was the most whole, the most cruel, the most beautiful. A love that never came to be, but never unraveled either. And now that I'm near the end, now that time no longer demands I hide, I tell it. I tell it so it can live somewhere. So someone somewhere will know it happened. That there was a man who promised to come back to me. And who did, but chose the wrong path. Because no one should leave this world with a heart full of what was never said, And I, Ruby Florentine Maxwell, 91 years old, am telling it now, to free my story. And maybe to help free one of yours, too. If there's one thing I've learned from this story, it's that silence has weight. It may feel light at first, easy to carry, but over time it turns into a stone in your chest, and no one should grow old carrying that many stones. Maybe you, out there, have lived something similar. A forbidden love, a gesture that was never understood, a secret you kept out of fear or shame. If you have, you don't have to tell anyone. But look at it, acknowledge it, give it a name, even if only in your heart. I held on to this love for over 70 years. Never spoken, never fully lived, but it existed. And that is enough. Because sometimes the truest kind of love is the one no one ever saw. But that changed everything inside. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have spoken up? Or kept it quiet too? I want to know what you feel, because this channel is for that, for us to remember, to feel, to let go, and to carry on. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. There are other true stories, told by women who were nurses in the war. Stories that stayed silent for decades. Until now. Thank you for listening. Truly.